Picture this. A city is absolutely terrified. There's a brutal serial killer on the loose. And then, finally, police make an arrest. Everyone thinks the nightmare is over, right? But what if they got the wrong man? Today, we're going to dive into the case of the Frankfurt Slasher and ask that really haunting question: was justice ever really served? So here's the mystery at the heart of it all. It's a pretty straightforward question, but man, the implications are huge. After 5 long years of terror, did Philly's law enforcement actually catch the real killer? Or did they lock up an innocent guy while the true monster was still out there, totally free? All right, to really get this case, you've got to understand the setting. So let's go back in time. We're in the Frankfurt neighborhood of Philadelphia, and the years are 1985 to 1990. For 5 solid years, this community was just gripped by fear. A complete sense of dread was hanging over everything. Why? Because there was a predator hunting in their streets, and nobody, I mean nobody, knew when or where he would strike next. So the media, of course, they gave him a name, the Frankfurt Slasher. And that name, it really tells you everything you need to know about how brutal these attacks were. The victims, they were all women, and the killer's method was just chillingly consistent every single time. It was sexual assault followed by a fatal stabbing. This horrific signature, well, that was the only thing connecting these crimes. It's what had the whole community living in terror. Okay, so now let's actually look at the timeline, because when you see it laid out, you start to get a real sense of the scale here, just how persistent and terrifying this all was. I mean, this wasn't some phantom who just struck once or twice and then disappeared. No, this was a long, drawn-out campaign of terror. Now, what's really chilling about this timeline is the pattern, or maybe the lack of a pattern. Just look at those gaps. You've got an attack in 85, a couple in 86, and then almost 2 full years of nothing, complete silence. Can you just imagine the false sense of security? People probably thought, okay, it's finally over. And then bam, the nightmare starts all over again in late 1988. Yeah, that 2-year gap, it just completely shattered any hope people had. It proved the slasher wasn't gone. He was just dormant, biding his time. And you can bet that when he came back, the fear was 10 times worse than it was before. And then we get to 1990. In the spring and summer, the killer strikes twice more. But it was the murder of a woman named Carol Dowd that was the one that finally gave the police the big break they'd been so desperate for. So, after 5 incredibly long years, the investigation finally zeroes in on a real person of interest. The focus shifts, you know? It's not about some faceless monster anymore. Now, it's about a man with a name, a job, a routine. They had a suspect in the murder of Carol Dowd. And that man's name was Leonard Christopher. He actually worked at a fish market pretty close to where Carol Dowd's body was discovered. And for the police and for the public, this felt like it. This was the end of the nightmare. They had a guy. They'd made an arrest. But you know, an arrest is one thing. A conviction? That's a whole other ballgame. Now, the prosecution had a job to do: build a case that was strong enough to lock Leonard Christopher up for good. And they did it. They got their conviction. But here's something that is absolutely crucial to remember. Leonard Christopher was only tried for the murder of Carol Dowd. Just that one murder, not the others. He was found guilty, sentenced to life in prison, and as far as the public was concerned, that was that. Case closed. The Frankfurt Slasher was finally off the streets. But this is where the whole official story starts to fall apart. Because once you actually start looking closely at the evidence, or really the lack of evidence, some really serious questions pop up. You start to wonder, wait a minute, did they actually get the right guy? Okay, let's just get right to one of the biggest problems with this entire case. There was a primary witness description, and not just for Carol Dowd, but for several of the victims, and it described a middle-aged white man. Leonard Christopher was a black man. He didn't fit that description at all. I mean, that is a massive contradiction, sitting right at the heart of the prosecution's case. So here's the bottom line. The case against him was just incredibly thin. The entire argument from the prosecution was based on circumstantial evidence. Things like, well, he worked near the crime scene. There was no DNA, no murder weapon, no physical evidence whatsoever, linking him to Carol Dowd and certainly not to any of the other victims. And you have to know this. From the day he was arrested until the day he died in prison, Leonard Christopher never, ever stopped saying he was innocent. And if all those doubts aren't enough to make you pause, well, get this. Probably the most compelling piece of evidence that suggests he was innocent, it didn't even show up until after he was already locked up. So no, this story does not end with his conviction. So let's be crystal clear about the timeline here. On December 12, 1990, Leonard Christopher is in prison. He's behind bars. It is physically impossible for him to be out committing another crime, right? And for the whole city of Philadelphia, this was a massive sigh of relief. The monster was caged. The streets were finally safe again. The years of terror were officially over. The books were closed on the Frankford Slasher. Or was he? What if the real monster wasn't in that cage at all? What if he was still out there watching and waiting? And this is the twist that changes everything. Because while Christopher was in custody, another woman, Michelle Denner, was murdered. And the attack, it had the exact same signature as the Frankfurt Slasher. It's the one question that just hangs over this entire case. How does a man who's locked up commit a murder out on the street? Well, the official explanation from the detectives was pretty simple. It had to be a copycat killer. But you have to ask yourself, was that just a convenient answer to sweep things under the rug? Or was this the undeniable proof they had the wrong guy the whole time? And all of this just leaves us with a whole pile of lingering questions, doesn't it? Like, why was Christopher convicted on such flimsy circumstantial evidence? If he was only responsible for one murder, then who killed all the other women? And maybe the biggest question of all, was Michelle Denner's murder just a tragic copycat killing, or was it the real slasher sending one final chilling message? In the end, the case of the Frankfurt Slasher just doesn't have a neat and tidy ending. You've got one conviction for one murder, and you have 8 other murders that are still officially unsolved. And it forces us to ask that deeply unsettling question. Did the city of Philadelphia put an innocent man in prison, and in doing so, allow a vicious serial killer to just disappear into the shadows? That's the mystery that haunts this case to this very day.